There is not one day that goes by where I don't think of the vast and untapped potential in a 6th entry in the Donkey Kong Country franchise. If you didn't know, which is completely fine because I never, ever talk about it, Donkey Kong Country is my favorite game franchise ever. And it pains me every waking minute that Retro Studios never got to finish their trilogy. At least not yet. And by the time that this video comes out, we are on launch day of Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. Look forward to a video on that very soon. And I know that some people aren't excited, but I don't care. I'm excited. And I thought it would be really fun, and I can't believe that I haven't made a video on this yet, to take a metaphorical dive together into what I would want out of a Donkey Kong Country 6. Hell, even the title sounds cool. The levels, the characters, the villains, the story, and everything else in between, I want to discuss it. Let's roll. The first and arguably the biggest thing that I would want in a Donkey Kong Country 6 is bringing back King K. Rool. I have enjoyed so much seeing the expanded lore and mythology and seeing new villains that aren't King K. Rool. Seeing Tiki Tong and his army of the Tiki Tak tribe and Lord Frederick, who is disgustingly underrated, as is Tiki Tong, with his army of Snowmads. I think both of those villains work incredibly well and are vastly underappreciated when you look at the tone and everything that they did for the 2 Returns games. But it just feels right having the conclusion to the Retro Studios trilogy, if Retro Studios is even the one that helms the game. Granted, this game is completely hypothetical. We've gotten zero confirmation that there's even a Donkey Kong Country 6 in development. But I'm assuming there is and will be at some point, and this is just what I want from it. I want King K. Rool back. I want the Kremlings back. And while I do want K. Rool back, I want the Kremlings back, I want them in some capacity to mention Frederick and Tiki Tong. Like, just establishing continuity in that way would do a lot, in my opinion, and just it can be a throwaway line of dialogue, it can be something in the background, I don't care. Just mention Frederick, mention Tiki Tong, because they did do a good job at being the main antagonists of the 2 Returns games, and in my opinion, they don't get nearly enough credit. The second thing that I have here is bringing back more of the Animal Buddies. Animal Buddies added so much to the original trilogy of games, and Rambi was always my favorite just because I liked the simplicity. So I was really excited to see when they brought Rambi over to Returns and Tropical Freeze, but they didn't bring any others. There was no Squitter, there was no Ellie, there was no On Guard, there was no Espresso. It was just Rambi, which was really disappointing to me. The potential was definitely there. They could have done it, but they didn't, and it's fine. You know, I didn't necessarily dock the game's points for not having Animal Buddies. But in my mind, this is kind of like a Avengers Endgame scenario where this is like the culmination of sorts. It obviously probably won't be the definitive culmination, but I just kind of want it to come a bit more full circle. And having the Animal Buddies, bringing them back in, would just feel really great. And having Espresso, having On Guard, having Ellie, having Rambi, having Squitter, and just all the Animal Buddies from the past games. It doesn't have to be all of them, but just like some of them would go a long way in bringing back some of the detractors of these games. Because while these games are very highly claimed and very highly regarded, there are the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy purists who don't enjoy these games. They don't like these games. If you don't like these games, that's completely fine. Every opinion is valid. I just don't share that opinion at all, and I think that this duology of games is incredible. Retro Studios has never made a bad game. The third thing that I have on my list is more references to the original trilogy. I don't care what this means. I don't care how you express the callbacks, the Easter eggs, the nostalgia, whatever you want to call it, a fan service. It can be a throwaway line of dialogue in a text box. It can be, I mean, something that came to my head was like seeing the wreckage of the flying croc in the background of a level. I don't know how that would work, like continuity-wise, but having any continuity at all would just be such a cool and welcome addition to this franchise because, as I've said, the stories are not Zelda-level narratives. There's definitely more than most 2D Marios in my opinion, but that's not saying hardly anything. The story in Donkey Kong Country is very bare bones, but that's by design. I don't mind that. It's part of the charm of the original trilogy is that it's just so simple to pick up and play. Hey, your bananas were stolen. Go get them back. Okay, sounds good. Let's go on a quest. And it's more of that in the Retro Studios duology. And I love it. The fourth thing I have on my list is bringing back David Wise and Evelyn Fischer. For those of you who didn't know, Donkey Kong Country Returns was not composed by David Wise. It was composed by, I believe his name was Kenji Yamamoto. He remixed and modernized so many of the tracks that David Wise had originally composed. And by all regards, the Donkey Kong Country Returns soundtrack is incredible. It is unbelievable how good those pieces sound. Kenji Yamamoto did an incredible job at remixing them, revitalizing them, making them for a modern Returns game. But at the end of the day, it was David Wise's atmosphere and his original compositions that Mr. Yamamoto revitalized, remixed. And so and David Wise did come back for Tropical Freeze. He did that entire soundtrack, and Tropical Freeze has such an incredible and big, bombastic, epic, timeless soundtrack. It's got to be in the top 3 best scores of any video game ever. And I've said many times that Evelyn Fischer does not get the credit that she deserves for her contributions in the first Donkey Kong Country. I believe she did Simian Segway, which is such a iconic piece. She did some other ones, Donkey Kong Country 1, and she did almost the entirety of Donkey Kong Country 3. And so having her and having him together to do a soundtrack together, I think would just bring out the best of both of their styles of composing and writing music. And I think, again, going back to the Avengers Endgame comparison, it would feel like a greatest hits of Donkey Kong Country. Bringing back K. Rool, having our 2 main composers come back and work together, bringing back the Animal Buddies, more references to the stories and the events that took place over the original trilogy, and all of this will not equal a good game, obviously. Just having this nostalgia and having these things coming back from the past games will not make the game good on its own. You need a strong enough story, and you need to remain, this is the 5th thing, remain consistent with the tone and the gameplay that was established in Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze. Donkey Kong Country Returns, by all accounts, is a phenomenal game, and I can't wait to play Returns HD. And Tropical Freeze just elevated and multiplied everything that Returns did, but times 1,000. And a lot of people want to kind of go back to the way that the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy was, a bit more zoomed in. The movement was a bit more limited. It felt a little bit more realistic in what a monkey could actually do in terms of how high you could jump, how far you could jump, just the way the movement felt in general. And while the first Donkey Kong Country game is my favorite game ever made, I do vastly prefer the movement in the Returns duology of games. It's much more modern, and that might just be, Gen Z Justin talking, but I do prefer the more modern approach to the movement and to the tone and just the way that everything looks. Returns and Tropical Freeze are a lot more vibrant, and I don't want to say colorful because the original trilogy was plenty colorful, but it's more bouncy, it's more alive. There's a great video essay called Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze is Alive, and that's quite literally how these 2 Returns games feel. They feel alive, and just everything that you do feels so precise, and the original trilogy was precise. Don't think that I'm saying it's not, but don't regress the gameplay and the look of the game to match the old original trilogy, because we have those 3 games. Give us a new game to complete our new trilogy of games, you know? And I'm sure there's so much more that I could think of, that I could talk about, that I just can't think of off the top of my head right now that I would want in a potential Donkey Kong Country 6. But the last thing that I have written down here is not only more accessibility options, but more options in general. I was talking with some of the members of my Discord server, link is in the description, about the lack of options that are present in the Donkey Kong Country games, which on the original trilogy on the Super Nintendo, it makes sense. Those games were for a much different time. But with this new duology of games, there's no excuse. We're in modern times. You need to adapt. And I brought up, again, the motion controls. I'm going to talk about this in every video that I make. How much I hate motion controls. Having that as a requirement in the original Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii has caused me to have some pretty unpleasant, not memories, but feelings towards Returns. That's why I'm so excited to play Returns HD, because I can play the game how I want to play it. In a franchise that has never been stuck behind a motion control wall, why the heck would you introduce a system where you have to use motion controls? I get it, you want to utilize them for the Wii, and they're cool, and they're trendy, and they're fun, I get it, but make it an option. Make me, if someone, like in Returns HD, you can use the motion controls if you want. You can use button controls if you want, which I would recommend. Just giving us more options. And we were talking about in my Discord about the multiplayer options, how different the multiplayer is from the original trilogy to the Returns duology. It's a lot different. And I think just being able to choose between the 2 systems, like introducing a new multiplayer system that's a lot more similar to the original trilogy of games, it would just go a long ways. And the older I've gotten, I do think Tropical Freeze, honestly, I think a lot of these Donkey Kong Country games are perfect games. But I think that one of the biggest gripes that I have with Tropical Freeze, and especially Returns, is just the options. And like the accessibility options. If someone is physically unable to shake their controller, to shake their Wiimote, they can't play Returns. And to me, that just really sucks. And so I'm glad that the people behind Returns HD are adding in more accessibility options, more options in general, because more options is good options. You can never have enough, in my opinion, and I'm glad that they're finally catching on, even if it is, what is it, 15 years later. But guys, that is going to do it essentially for this video. I wanted to talk about what I want in a potential Donkey Kong Country 6, and I have done just that. I want Donkey Kong Country 6 so bad, and here's to hoping that it's a launch title, or at least a title at some point on the Nintendo Switch 2. As I talked about in my last video, Donkey Kong is very clearly a front runner for Nintendo going forward. His presence in the Mario movie, at Super Nintendo World, the remasters that we've been getting, the Lego Mario Donkey Kong sets. It's very apparent that they're building to something big, and I would obviously take a new 3D Donkey Kong as well, but I want a conclusion to this Returns duology of Donkey Kong Country games. So, this is going to be a fun video to post. I want to hear in the comments, what do you guys want from Donkey Kong Country 6? Again, this game hasn't been announced. It's been rumored for years and years and years, but nothing official has been announced. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys want? Do you want K. Rool back? Do you want a brand new villain to kind of round out the Retro Studios trilogy with 3 brand new Donkey Kong villains? I certainly wouldn't mind that, although I would prefer K. Rool. What do you guys think? Do you want David Wise back? Evelyn Fischer back? Only Evelyn, only David? Do you want the Kremlings back? Do you want them to kind of go back to the original trilogy gameplay feel and aesthetic? Or do you like the way that they're going? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear from you guys. Again, like, comment, and be sure to subscribe. I am student teaching at the moment, and so the uploads are going to be a bit more sparse and a bit more sporadic, but I will definitely keep pushing out content for you guys, obviously. Yeah, join the Just Nintendo Society Discord, link in the description. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great day, guys, and take care.